Imagine walking through the tranquil woods alone, only to find yourself face to face with an unspeakable terror. What would you do if the peaceful trail turned into a sinister trap? Growing up, I loved walking alone in the woods. It was my sanctuary, where inspiration flowed freely for my writing. Back in school, I'd often stroll with just a pencil, a notebook, and sometimes a haunting soundtrack like Silent Hill or Parasite Eve. Despite the eerie tones, I never felt afraid until one unforgettable day on the Appalachian Trail. Now, as an adult working a desk job at a call center, I still enjoy hiking and camping on weekends. Living only 2 hours away from the Appalachian Trail made it my favorite escape. I'd venture out solo, relishing the solitude. Solo hiking wasn't without risks. I once sprained an ankle miles deep into the woods and had to limp back alone. But nothing prepared me for what happened that overcast Saturday. I set off early for a one-night trip, intending to keep it short since I had plans for my sister's baby shower the next day. The hike was smooth and pleasant. The air had a perfect balance of coolness and humidity, making it one of those rare, utterly comfortable treks. After a few miles, I decided to rest under a poplar tree, snacking on a Cliff Bar and finishing a bottle of water. As I scanned my surroundings, lost in thought about the meeting I'd have to attend on Tuesday, my heart froze. 20 yards away, atop a dead tree, a human figure perched, small, dressed in a coat, pants, and shoes, with hair blowing in the wind. It was utterly still. I panicked. Surely no child would be at the very top of a dead tree on the Appalachian Trail, right? Heart racing, I ran toward the tree, calling out, "Hey, are you okay?" There was no response, no movement. Driven by concern, I began climbing the tree. It was sturdy and recently dead, making it easier to scale, though I hadn't climbed anything since I was a teenager. As I neared the figure, I reached out to touch its shoe and it fell off, revealing nothing. No sock, no foot. The coat and pants were empty. Even more chilling, the hair inside the hood was real human hair, long and straight, with flakes of skin at the roots. A wave of nausea hit me. Before I could process the horror, I heard slow, heavy footsteps below. Then, a whisper, faint but unmistakable, cutting through the rustling wind. "Come down." The voice sounded feminine, elderly, and disturbingly close. Yet, when I looked down, no one was there. My body trembled as I clung to the tree, muscles straining. Minutes passed. I was too terrified to move. The whisper came again, soft but insistent. "Come down." My legs wobbled as I descended slowly. Step by step, I forced myself to climb lower. At last, I was close enough to jump. With a deep breath, I leaped, landing hard but uninjured. Without a glance back, I ran down the trail, adrenaline propelling me forward until I saw another hiker. I didn't stop until I reached my car. Only then did I report the incident to the rangers. The empty clothes, the human hair, the whispers had haunted me. Had I been lured into a trap? To this day, I have no explanation for what I encountered. I've stayed far away from the Appalachian Trail since, haunted by the feeling that whatever was out there. What if the monster your little brother feared wasn't imaginary? What if it came to your door, night after night, hungry for something, or someone? My brother and I had our share of struggles growing up. His nickname was Time, and he was 4 years younger than me. We didn't have an easy life. Our mother was cruel, if you've ever read A Child Called It. That was basically our experience. There were 8 of us, but for some reason Time and I bore the brunt of her wrath. Maybe it was because we shared the same dad, while the others didn't. At an early age, Time developed a deep fear of the dark. We had to stay in the unfinished garage, no windows, no AC. We shared a bunk bed with worn-out mattresses. Time's terror of the night wasn't without reason, though. One night, our mother locked us in the garage for a few days. She was furious because I'd stolen food from the kitchen to feed us. She didn't let us eat with the rest of the family. This time it was zebra cakes. We hadn't eaten in days, and I was desperate. She gave us a bucket for the bathroom and a jug of water, nothing more. That night I heard Time sniffling as the door locked behind us. I climbed down from the top bunk and sat beside him. "Are you okay?" "It's only for a couple of days." "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have taken those snack cakes," I whispered. He shook his head silently. He didn't talk much, but he used broken sign language. He made the sign for cookie. And I nodded, hopping up to grab 2 Oreos I'd hidden for him. They were stale by now, but he always smiled when I gave them to him. Time took his time eating, savoring every bite. As he ate, I noticed him staring at the garage door. "What is it?" I asked. His eyes widened and he shook his head. Then he signed. Scared. I knelt down and hugged him. "It's okay. I'm not going to let Mom hurt you." I'd always made it a point to take the brunt of her anger, shielding him as best as I could. But then Time signed. "Monster. A monster." "There's no monsters, remember? Yoshi scared them all away." I reassured him. He loved Yoshi from the Mario games, and I always told him Yoshi would protect him when he was afraid. Suddenly, something slammed against the garage door, making both of us jump. "No." Time whimpered. "It's back." I tried to stay calm. "It's probably just a bird. They get confused in the dark." But he shook his head violently. "No, it comes at night, every night." My heart sank. "What comes at night?" Before he could answer, another loud boom echoed through the garage. Time whispered, "Hungry." I tried to reassure him again. "I know, buddy. I'll get us some food once Mom takes her meds." But Time interrupted me, trembling. "It's hungry." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I shone a flashlight toward the door but saw nothing, just shadows and silence. Then, another boom. The door rattled, the metal lock straining under pressure. I grabbed my little pocket knife. If it was someone trying to break in, I'd defend us. But Time whimpered again. "A monster." His small voice broke something in me. Whatever was outside wasn't just in his imagination. I pressed duct tape around the lock to reinforce it, though I doubted it would hold. The door rattled again, the sound of nails scraping against it like chalk on a blackboard. Time whimpered under the blanket as I climbed into his bunk, clutching the knife. "What is it?" "Time," I whispered. He signed slowly. "Talks to me. Every night." "What does it say?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Wants in." He signed, pointing at himself. My blood ran cold. "What is it?" He shrugged. "Monster. Big. Scary. The banging stopped, but the silence was worse. Time eventually fell asleep, but I stayed awake, listening. At some point, exhaustion took me. When I woke up, the sunlight streamed through the cracks of the garage door. I quickly slipped out and checked outside. The dents on the door told me last night wasn't a dream. On the ground, I saw the worst part massive footprints. They were huge, four-toed, and resembled something straight out of Jurassic Park. When I went back inside, Time was eating the food I'd stolen earlier. He looked up at me and asked, "Monster gone?" I nodded, lying. "Yeah, it's gone." But in my heart, I knew it wasn't over. Imagine coming home after a late-night shift, exhausted, craving nothing but sleep. But as you gather your things, you notice a face unlike any you've ever seen watching you from the shadows. This happened to me only a few nights ago. I live in a quiet town where nothing much ever happens. Sure, you'll hear the occasional news story about someone robbing the local Walmart, but that's about it. Break-ins or murders, those are unheard of. My point is, it's a safe town until recently. That night, I was heading home from work after a long shift. I worked the night shift, so I usually get home around 2 a.m. The roads were empty, and the sky was pitch black. My home is a duplex with 2 units, one upstairs and one downstairs. I live in the upstairs unit, which means I have to go behind the house to access a separate set of stairs that lead to my door. Out of laziness, I'd started parking my car behind the house, creating a flat patch of grass that I called my parking spot. There are no street lamps in this hidden residential area, so my car's headlights were the only thing lighting the way. I pulled into my spot and parked the car. As usual, I began gathering my things. My purse, lunchbox, and a few other items. Just as I reached for the car door handle, I froze. A few feet away, I saw what I swear was a face staring at me. It was white as paper, with round, pitch-black eyes. There were no ears, no mouth, just a terrifying, jagged smile filled with long, yellow teeth. Some of the teeth were brown, like they were rotting. I couldn't move. My hand hovered over the door handle, trembling. Seconds felt like hours as I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the face vanished. I blinked, hoping my exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Maybe I'd imagined it. I shook my head and tried to calm myself. Then I heard rustling from the overgrown plants near my car. My head snapped in that direction. Something dashed past my car, heading toward the door I needed to get to. It moved so fast, but I caught just enough detail to wish I hadn't. It was small, like a child, but it didn't look human. Its skin was pure white, almost glowing. It was so thin and malnourished that its bones stuck out. It moved on all fours like some kind of animal. I pressed my back against the seat, unable to breathe. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt trapped, completely alone in the dark, with no one around to help me. Should I run for the door? Should I call someone? Should I honk the horn to wake my downstairs neighbor? I considered every option, but none of them felt safe. It was like this thing was waiting for me to make a move. So I waited. An hour passed. Then another. I didn't see it again, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the car. The fear was suffocating. Finally, the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon. I scanned the area, The trees, the grass, the door to my stairs, it was all quiet and still. Only when I saw a few cars driving by did I muster the courage to get out. I bolted for the door, throwing it open and running up the stairs. I slammed the door behind me, waking my downstairs neighbor in the process. I haven't told anyone about what happened. Who would believe me? They'd say I was tired and hallucinating, or that it was just a stray dog. But I know what I saw. Since that night, I've refused to go home after work. Instead, I drive an hour to my parents' house and only come back once the sun is fully up. When my lease is up, I'm leaving immediately. The scariest part of all? My car doors unlock automatically when I park. That thing could have opened my door and gotten in if it wanted to. Whatever it was, a skinwalker, the rake, or something worse, I hope I never encounter it again. What if your childhood home was more than just old and creaky? What if it held secrets so terrifying they stayed with you long after you moved out? Between the ages of 7 and 14, I lived in an old house in central Indiana. It wasn't just old, it was over 100 years old. From the moment we moved in, I never felt comfortable there. Phantom footsteps echoed on the stairs at night. The radio would turn on by itself. Once, a bench even lifted off the ground on its own. The house seemed alive in the worst possible way. This first story, though, happened to my dad. The basement door was in the kitchen, and if you sat in the middle room, you could see straight into the kitchen. One morning, while getting ready for work, my dad bent over to tie his shoe. Suddenly, he felt a strange urge to look toward the kitchen. As he lifted his head, he saw a cloaked figure walking across the kitchen floor, moving from the basement door to the other side. My dad was a skeptic, but he swears to this day that he saw it. The second experience was mine. I never felt safe in that house, especially at night. I would lie awake for hours, waiting for my dad to wake up and get ready for work. Only then could I finally fall asleep, knowing someone else was awake and nearby. One night I was wide awake, watching TV in the living room. Out of nowhere, I got that awful, uneasy feeling. My body tensed. Something was wrong. I glanced toward the living room door, and that's when I saw it. A translucent figure with what looked like a square-shaped head appeared from around the door frame. It peeked at me, then vanished. I froze. The living room door was the only way out. I was trapped. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled the blanket over my head and prayed it would go away. Eventually it did. Years later, I still think about that house. I've lived in other places since then, but nothing has ever felt as unsettling as that house in Indiana. The memories of what I saw and felt there stay with me, even now. You might think college is all about exams, parties, and late-night study sessions. But what if the dorm you called home had a dark secret and it started to haunt you? I graduated from this university about a year ago, but I still vividly remember what happened during my freshman year. If no one believes this, that's okay. As a Wiccan and someone fascinated by the paranormal, I've always sought to understand the unexplained. Some students on campus believe the story I'm about to tell. My roommate at the time does too. The dorm I lived in was on the farthest side of the campus and one of the oldest buildings there. It had 2 sections, a girl's side and a boy's side. Each section had a showroom to give prospective students a look at what the rooms were like. Here's where things get creepy. A student had supposedly died in the girls' showroom. I always thought it was unsettling, but I didn't dwell on it. A few months into living there, my roommate and I experienced something we couldn't explain. At first, our beds weren't bunked, but we eventually rearranged the room and stacked them. I slept on the top bunk, and she took the bottom. One night, we were both lying in bed watching TV. As always, we'd locked our door. We never left it unlocked, especially at night. Out of nowhere, the door started to open. It moved slowly at first, then swung fully open, revealing the hallway. We both froze. We stared at each other in shock. How could the door open from the outside without a key? Terrified, we got up, slammed the door shut, and locked it again. Neither of us slept well that night. After that, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in the dorm. Late at night, when I had to use the bathroom, I'd feel like something was watching me. The hallway leading to the girls' bathroom was dimly lit, with only a single bulb in the center and the faint red glow of exit signs. I always made my trips quick and avoided looking into the large bathroom mirror. I was scared that if I did, I might see something. Eventually, my roommate and I learned we were living directly above the girls' showroom, the same one where the student had died. As we talked to other students in the dorm, we realized we weren't the only ones experiencing strange things. Others had heard their doors rattling or saw them unlocking and opening on their own. Some even heard footsteps outside their rooms when no one was there. Even after moving out, I'll never forget the unease I felt in that dorm. Whatever happened there, it left an imprint, and it's something I'll carry with me forever. What if your college wasn't just haunted by memories of late-night cramming? What if it was home to spirits that refused to stay quiet no matter how much you tried to debunk them? This story started in 2019 and continued until the spring of 2021, when I graduated. My college had a paranormal investigators club, and for anonymity, I won't name the university or the group. I became the president of the club in my freshman year, in the spring of 2018. I was passionate about making the club active, organizing more events, and conducting investigations. From our investigations, both on and off campus, I became convinced that something paranormal exists. What it is, I don't know. But the evidence we gathered was hard to ignore. The first part of this story happened just before November 9th, 2019. There was a building on campus we used for training new members, because it was usually spiritually dead. It was a safe space for beginners to practice debunking supposed hauntings and exploring methods of investigation. On November 9th, my vice president, Carmen, a senior member named Dave, and a new recruit, John, entered the building with basic equipment: an EMF detector, a broken flashlight, a walkie-talkie for communication, and an audio recorder for potential EVPs. I wasn't with them that night, but I learned everything from the recordings they brought back. Their investigation began like any other. They took baseline readings and explained to John how to look for inconsistencies. After an hour of walking through the building, they decided to sit in the lobby area on the second floor, near the elevator. Carmen placed the audio recorder in front of her. Dave set up the broken flashlight, while John monitored the EMF detector. They started asking questions, trying to communicate with any entities present. Carmen even tried prompting John to debunk the flickering flashlight, which they all knew was faulty. It was all routine until Carmen coughed and dropped her phone. In the recording, you can hear a faint noise after this, a sound that still gives me chills. It was a baby crying. The crying wasn't loud, but it was distinct. It was louder than the two boys, but quieter than Carmen, meaning it had to be between them. No one heard it in real time. It only showed up on the audio later. There was no one else in the building. Security had locked the doors after letting them in. Months later, after COVID hit, we got special permission to return to the building. Only 3 of us could go: me, our club advisor Cassie, and another senior member, Autumn. We wore masks and followed all the rules. I set up equipment where the crying had been recorded while Cassie and Autumn stood nearby. As we worked, they kept glancing down a long hallway longer than a football field. Finally, Cassie mentioned that she'd seen something. I suggested they describe it to me separately to see if they were seeing the same thing. Cassie said she saw a twitching, crawling figure moving across the floor. Autumn, however, said she saw a tall man wearing a hat. Their descriptions were completely different. I had a full-spectrum camera, so I walked down the hallway to set it up, hoping to capture whatever they were seeing. We sat for hours, asking questions and observing. For a long time, nothing happened. Then we heard it. A scream. It echoed down the hallway, loud and horrifying, as if someone were in immense pain. We ran toward the sound, thinking someone might need help, but there was no one there. Autumn found a door that made a squeaky noise when it opened or closed. She let it swing shut on its own, and the sound was identical to the scream we'd heard. But the door had been open when we arrived. There was no wind, no one else to close it, and no reason for it to swing shut on its own. We decided to end the investigation there and packed up. The next day, I reviewed the footage. What I saw shocked me. Just before the door swung shut, the camera captured something twitching and crawling. It flickered as it moved toward the door. The moment it disappeared from view, the door slammed shut. From that day on, every investigation in that building brought unexplained events. Strange sounds, shadowy figures, and chilling personal experiences followed every visit. I don't believe whatever is there is human, nor do I think it likes humans. It gave us some great stories, but also left scars we'll carry forever. If anyone investigates the building in the future, I hope they're prepared. This field can be dangerous, and I've seen that firsthand. Have you ever wondered what ancient mysteries lie hidden in the shadows of dense, untouched forests? What if one hike led you into the heart of something so old and malevolent, it changed the way you see the world forever? This is the story of my chilling journey into the Appalachian wilderness, a tale that will haunt your imagination to the very end. The Appalachian Mountains stretch before me, a stunning tapestry of rolling hills, dense forests, and jagged peaks. These ancient ranges, extending from Georgia to Maine, hold some of the most breathtaking landscapes in North America. As the morning sun cast its golden light over the Blue Ridge Mountains to the east, I marveled at their amber-hued contours. In contrast, the Great Smoky Mountains to the west were cloaked in their signature mist, their silvery fog clinging stubbornly to the trees. The Appalachian Trail, a 2,200-mile-long footpath famed as the longest hiking-only trail in the world, offers a unique journey through diverse ecosystems. From the lush deciduous forests of the South to the rocky alpine peaks of New England, every section has its challenges and its charm. For someone like me, an experienced hiker, it was more than just a path, it was a place to find solace and adventure. That morning I stood at a trailhead ready for a journey unlike any I had taken before. My plan was to explore a forgotten spur of the main trail and abandoned path known as the Old Lonesome Trail. It was unmarked on any of my maps, but the whispered tales of its challenges and mysteries called to me. I craved the thrill of the unknown. With my backpack securely fastened, I stepped onto the trail. The morning light revealed wildflowers, towering trees, and crystal-clear streams that seemed to sing in harmony with the rustling leaves. But as I ventured deeper, the path grew narrow, the trees twisted and gnarled, and shadows danced ominously in the corners of my vision. Half a mile in, I stumbled upon a weathered sign barely visible beneath moss and vines. It read, "Old Lonesome Trail, abandoned, enter at your own risk." A chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, but my curiosity won. The forest seemed alive, its whispers carried by the wind. My steps grew cautious as the trail became overgrown, and an eerie silence settled. The once lush surroundings turned oppressive, with towering trees forming an almost suffocating canopy. Deeper in, I noticed strange symbols carved into rocks and trees' runes that seemed deliberate yet indecipherable. As I studied one of them, the forest fell unnaturally silent. My breath quickened. That's when the whispers began. They were faint at first, carried on the breeze, but they grew louder, more insistent. Disembodied voices seemed to murmur from the depths of the trees. I spun around, searching for their source, but saw only flickering shadows just out of reach. As dusk descended, I stumbled upon the remains of a campsite. The tent was collapsed, belongings scattered, and a long-dead fire pit lay cold. Among the debris, I found a journal. Its pages, yellowed with age, described a growing sense of dread, strange symbols, and the feeling of being watched. The final entry read, "I can't ignore it anymore. Something is out there, something old and angry. I tried to leave, but the trail won't let me go. If you find this, turn back now." Panic clawed at my chest. I stuffed the journal into my pack and pressed on, driven by fear, but also a determination to uncover the truth. As night fell, a thick fog rolled in, and the air grew icy cold. Then from the mist, a shape emerged, a twisted, flickering figure with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the forest had closed in, twisting the path into an unrecognizable maze. Shadows darted between the trees, and guttural growls echoed in the distance. What followed was a fight for survival unlike anything I'd ever experienced, a relentless pursuit by an ancient, malevolent presence. Each step deeper into the forest revealed new horrors, whispering voices, chilling silences, and a sensation of being hunted by an entity that thrived on fear. I finally collapsed at an old cabin, a forgotten relic in the woods. There I discovered photographs and diaries of hikers who had walked this trail before me, each detailing eerily similar encounters. Their faces were frozen in terror, their stories ending abruptly. Morning came, but escape eluded me. The trail twisted upon itself, leading me back to where it all began, the sign for the old Lonesome Trail. The forest had trapped me in its endless, malevolent grasp, and I knew I was its latest prisoner. Now I wander the woods, hoping for a way out. If you hear whispers in the trees or see shadows flicker in the corner of your vision, turn back. Some trails are not meant to be traveled. The thing about monsters is they don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they sparkle like fireflies in the night, right up until they're close enough to strike. Trail End was a quiet town that lived up to its name. Nestled between the Tennessee River and the Appalachian Mountains, it attracted outdoor enthusiasts seeking escape from civilization. A year ago, I was one of them. My life was falling apart back then. Fresh out of college, I was drowning in student loan debt with no job prospects in my field. I took a dead-end job to pay the bills, enduring soul-crushing micromanagement that made me want to quit daily. The only saving grace was that the office windows were shatterproof. My relationship with Charlie wasn't doing much better. We were at a crossroads, and only one of us seemed interested in a future together. Our playful banter had turned bitter, making home feel more like a prison than a sanctuary. We needed this weekend getaway. I hoped the trip would help us reconnect. If it went well, our relationship had a chance. If not, well, I didn't want to think about that. We drove up in my old car, deep blue. Charlie hated that car, but I loved her despite her flaws: the glowing check engine light, the 200,000 miles on the odometer, and all her quirks. Against the odds, she carried us up the mountain roads to our cabin. The cabin looked ancient, probably dating back to Lincoln's time. Inside was slightly better, featuring a massive river rock fireplace and a surprisingly comfortable king-size bed. But the real draw was the view from the porch: a golden valley of sweet grass leading down to the river, with dense pine woods on the opposite side. At Eddie's shack, the local general store, we met the owner himself. Eddie was straight from small-town Central, casting salt and pepper hair under a worn base pro shop hat, red plaid shirt with black suspenders, whittling wood when we walked in. "City folk," he said without looking up. "How can you tell?" I asked. He just laughed. The conversation was pleasant until Eddie mentioned the creatures. "You see those fireflies in the valley at night?" he asked. "They ain't what they seem." "What are they?" Charlie asked, intrigued. "The May men," Eddie replied, his voice dropping. "Tall as trees, with glowing green eyes and arms like blades. They disguise themselves as fireflies until they're close enough to strike." I wanted to dismiss it as local folklore, but that night, when the fireflies surrounded us on the boardwalk, Charlie took a photo. Between us and the image were two green lights, not fireflies, but eyes. Someone or something was standing behind us. What followed was a terrifying chase back to the cabin, pursued by a creature that moved like lightning and screamed like death itself. We barely made it inside, but the May man wasn't done. It tried coming down the chimney, just as Eddie had warned. Only a hastily lit fire saved our lives. We survived that night, but sometimes, even now, when I'm alone on our city balcony, I swear I hear that scream again. I keep our fireplace ready, just in case. After all, I burned it once. I can do it again. What if the Appalachian wilderness wasn't just a serene escape, but a place teeming with mysteries and dangers beyond belief? Join a seasoned ranger and his nephew as they face eerie encounters, cryptic creatures, and the chilling rules of survival in a land older than time. Watch till the end to uncover every haunting detail and lesson from the trail. I was born and raised in Appalachia, spending my first 22 years in Kentucky before moving to Tennessee. My love for the outdoors eventually led me to a job with the Forest Service, which was perfect for me. I loved the peace of nature, helping lost hikers find their way, and assisting in rescues. My trailer, nestled deep in the woods, became my sanctuary, and I lived there with my loyal Labrador, Barkley. A few weeks ago, my nephew Riker came to visit after graduating college. He had always dreamed of hiking the Appalachian Trail, and I agreed to take him if he was prepared. Too many people underestimate the wilderness, but Riker was like a son to me, and I wanted to share the survival skills I'd learned over the years. I also wanted to warn him about the things in these mountains no one talks about. The night before we set out, I cooked us a hearty dinner and laid out our plans. But before Riker went to bed, I gave him a warning: make sure you close the curtains before you sleep. He looked confused. Why? We're in the middle of nowhere. I just replied, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Thankfully, he listened. Years ago, I learned why this rule matters. One night, I left my curtains open, enjoying the moonlight, and woke to see two glowing red eyes outside my window. They weren't lights, they were eyes attached to something tall and unnatural. I froze, backing out of the room and sleeping on the couch that night. Ever since, I've made it a habit to always keep the curtains closed. We woke early, ready to hit the trail. While brewing coffee, Riker saw Barkley standing on the porch and got up to let him in. I stopped him just in time. Wait, I said, motioning to Barkley still fast asleep on his bed. Riker stared at the empty porch, his face pale. Is it a stray? He asked. I shook my head. We'll talk later. By 7 a.m., we were on the trail, enjoying the stunning views. Riker was in awe of the mountains, but a few hours in, he stopped abruptly. Do you hear that? He asked. Yeah. I listened closely and heard it, a faint, distorted sound like a tornado siren. We need to get away from that, I said firmly. Riker argued that it could be a weather alert, but I cut him off. Trust me, run. The sound grew louder, almost deafening, and then we saw it. A tall, rusted structure that looked like an old telephone pole moved across the trail. Its base uprooted itself like legs, and the blaring siren distorted into a shriek. We ran as fast as we could, tripping over roots and tearing through branches. After what felt like forever, the sound faded. Exhausted and scratched up, Riker turned to me. What the hell was that? It was time to tell Riker the truth. There are things out here you can't explain, I said, handing him a list of rules I'd written for him. 1. Always sleep with your curtains closed. Never risk seeing the red eyes, they're not from any animal you know. 2. If you hear a siren, run. It's not a weather alert. It's a cryptid that mimics sounds to lure people in. If it catches you, you won't survive. 3. Don't trust cries for help. Voices calling your name or sounding like a baby crying are traps. Ignore them and keep moving. 4. Never whistle at night. It attracts something you don't want to meet. 5. If you see a cottage in the woods, don't go inside. It's not real, and those who do are never the same. 6. Beware of complete silence. If the woods go quiet, hum, sing, or make noise until you leave the area. As we set up camp that night, Riker listened intently, no longer skeptical. But our peace didn't last. That night, I had a vivid dream of a creature a dog-sized body with the head of a rabbit, its hollow eyes staring at me. I woke, gasping, only to hear Riker yelling, "Uncle James." He rushed into my tent, pale and shaking. "Did something happen to you too?" he asked. I nodded. "I think it's the Bell Witch," he whispered. The next morning we packed up and relocated. Despite everything, Riker surprised me. Over breakfast, he said, "I've decided to move here next month. I got a job nearby. I want to stay close to the trail." I smiled, proud of his courage, handing him the list of rules. I said, "Keep this updated. You're going to need it." As Riker left, I reflected on the mountain's mysteries. These ancient hills have seen things humans will never fully understand. They're beautiful, but they demand respect. And if you're ever lucky enough to explore them, remember, follow the rules, or you might not make it out. Imagine you're alone in the misty woods, every tree marked by a haunting white swatch, the silence pressing on you like a physical weight. Then you hear it a thump, louder, closer. What would you do if you realized you're not alone? A worn wooden sign advertised the path. Below it, in small, unremarkable letters, it spelled out Ice Water Spring Shelter and Charlie's Bunyan, with arrows pointing toward my destination. Another arrow pointed back to the bustling parking lot at Newfound Gap, which I'd just passed through. I hoisted my backpack higher on my shoulders and continued on. The spring sun was high, radiating warmth, and I felt confident I had time to explore the oddly named side trail before settling into the shelter for the night. White swatches of paint the famed white blazes marked the trees alongside the trail. Over the last 100 or so miles, I had come to trust these markers with near religious devotion. I'd started this journey weeks earlier, covering 8 to 10 miles a day at first. I wasn't counting the calendar days, but I knew I was making progress. Just a few days ago, I'd crossed into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and within a week, I'd be through it entirely. The transition from winter to spring was unmistakable. Bare branches now burst with fresh green leaves. Wildflowers lined the trail, birds chirped, and insects buzzed. For now, I tried to enjoy those moments, even though a small part of me worried I'd grow tired of nature's ever-present hum. At the side trail's entrance, a wooden sign marked my destination, Charlie's Bunyan. A warning beneath it read, "Please control children closely." Intrigued, I ventured off the main path. The Bunyan was a rocky outcropping, a rounded lump of stone offering a breathtaking view of the mountains. I stayed far from the edge and marveled at the rolling hills' evergreens mixed with bright spring leaves, like an ocean of foliage stretching to the horizon. Then the fog came. The gray mist that gave the Smokies their name rolled in, sweeping over the hills until the mountains disappeared. Soon I wasn't looking at a forest, but at a sea of swirling, damp fog. I packed my things and turned back. As I retraced my steps down the side trail, the mist thickened, descending into the trees. At first I could see a few yards ahead. Then, only a few feet. My confidence kept me moving forward, even as my pulse quickened. The fog clung to every branch, every bush, as though it were alive. I scanned the trees, desperate to spot the white blazes, but each trunk I passed was bare. My breath hitched. Panic clawed at me. I couldn't have wandered off the trail, could I? My mind raced. I searched frantically until finally a white swatch appeared through the haze. My relief was so overwhelming I nearly collapsed against the tree. My breathing slowed, and I scolded myself. It's just fog. You're fine. But as I stood and continued walking, the fear still nibbled at my thoughts. The light had dimmed unnaturally quickly. The afternoon seemed to give way to dusk. And that's when I noticed it. Every tree bore a white blaze. Not every few yards as it should be, but every single tree, as far as I could see. My footsteps faltered. The forest was silent, not the quiet of chirping birds and buzzing insects. This was something else. A complete, oppressive silence. Then I heard it. Thump. The sound was muffled by the fog, but unmistakable. My legs froze. The silence made it louder, more real. Thump. Closer. I forced my feet to move, breaking into a half jog. The fog thinned slightly, but the blazes continued, each tree marked white, an endless repetition. I kept moving. Thump. Louder now, behind me. I ran, the fog parting just enough for me to see. Thump. It was right there. I stopped dead. The forest opened into a barren expanse of lifeless trees, each marked with a white swatch. The rolling hills were gone. The leaves were gone. Only an endless plain of dead trunks stretching into the mist. And then I saw it. A figure, towering. Thin. Its angular limbs clawed at the treetops, its legs crashing down with impossible weight. Thump. The fog churned around its limbs as though it were part of it, as if the mist was alive. I ran. I sprinted as fast as my legs could carry me. My backpack thumped against me, but I barely noticed. Thump. It was so close. I tore the pack off, leaving it behind. I leapt over roots and dodged branches. The forest blurred into streaks of white swatches. Thump. A root caught my foot. I fell hard, skidding across the trail. Pain shot through me, but I barely noticed. I curled into a ball, waiting expecting the end. Thump. The earth shook. Then, silence. Slowly I opened my eyes. Bright sunlight filtered through the trees. Birds chirped. Insects buzzed. Leaves swayed in the spring breeze. I stood, trembling, and scanned the trees. A single white swatch marked one trunk nearby. The next tree was bare. I stumbled forward, not daring to look back. Hours later, I made it back to the parking lot at Newfound Gap. A ranger drove me to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, where I spent a sleepless night in a cheap hotel. The next day, I flew home to Austin. I told myself it was a hallucination, maybe a fever, maybe exhaustion. But when I arrived at my parents' house, I froze. There, on the old oak tree in our yard, the tree I'd climbed 100 times as a kid, was a single white swatch.